told you we'd have a few presentations before ours. So this is really a topic that has been brought forward by council in recent weeks related to sediment and stormwater regulations. And we've had this conversation in this room a couple of times. And then coincidentally, we had a meeting last week, or at our last meeting, with the Soil Conservation District, who we partner with. And it was focused on these topics. And it was, at that point, we thought it'd be a good idea to bring it officially forward into a council meeting and have a conversation related to these regulations. I'm going to show you a few slides of the results of recent storm or rain activity that happened here in Sussex just a month ago, and the results of that, which I think you've all seen and are familiar with. And then we'll go into a conversation led by these folks related to the regulations and perhaps some considerations that both the county as well as the Sussex Conservation District could consider. So I think I've covered this already. I'm just going to jump into the pictures. This is a series of pictures on an area right off of Route 24, and if you can see the cursor on the screen, this is a development subdivision known as Walden. And this is the Route 24 little bridge right here, and this is what's known as Burton Pond. And this is an area that the county purchased in recent years for preservation. And then this is Sarah Run right here, if you can see the cursor.
What's the date of that photo?
This picture was March of this year.
March.
Yeah. So we're focused in on the Walden development over on the left of the picture, and you can see this water area here, and you can see a discoloration over here. This is the focus of the picture.
See, I would have thought that was, is this last year?
No, this is
all this year.
This is all this year.
Because last year was the same story, maybe worse.
Different area, but yes, same water resource.
Right.
Now we're on to looking at a different angle, but this is the development on the right-hand side. You can see the water and the effects of the runoff that's come from the Walden development.
So that brown area is water, is what the brown?
That's actually water.
So
water. Okay.
Where's Sarah's Run?
Sarah's Run would be to the right, be over here.
Yeah, and I can tell you that I walked that property that the county purchased, and several years ago there was a big stand of tall marsh grass and whatnot right there at the headwater, or where they intersect, and now that is all gone. It's dead. I mean, it's wiped out.
I'll take one. By the way, these pictures are courtesy of Driscoll Drones. Some folks may be familiar with them.
Fortunately, there's no photos today that are new from him, so not yet anyway.
So this picture is now hovering over top of the development, turned looking into the waterway, and you can see the area of the spillage, which is right here. You can see the black silk fences right along the line here, and then what overcome the silk fence went into the waterway here. I would say robust conversation at our last council meeting regarding the new buffer ordinance and the new standards of the buffer ordinance. This subdivision was approved and built with the old regulations.
The attorney's argument was that the new buffer ordinance, which creates the 100-foot essentially buffer, will be adequate to ensure that this is not repeated in the future. And I don't know. I mean, I'd like to hear from the experts if they concur with that concept.
And because you haven't voted on that application yet, we'll skip past any consideration of those points. But that was said at the hearing. I think the hearing's closed now, right?
The hearing is closed.
Yes.
And the record.
The
record is closed. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I'll skip to the next series of pictures. This is a different development. This one is what we know as Shady Lane. That is the little road that runs off of Banks Road along this area right here. This is a project, again, same time frame, under construction. We had a couple inches of rain in the area, and then the results of that rain You can see this is as barren as a site gets during construction phase. Trees have been removed, the soil's been moved, no infrastructure in place yet. I don't even believe they've put in the sewer pipes yet because I can see the pipes above ground. Rain happened, rain washed down into this area. The feature could not hold the water for the amount of water that was that happened at that event, and then eventually topped the banks of this feature and then made its way into the neighboring property. You can see the water that's run into this area here. And I'll show you one last picture that is from the neighbor's house, from their, I guess, one of those electronic camera things that was taken from their deck. So the water running from the development, which is over in this area. So that is just the pictures that I wanted to show to frame up this conversation. I really want to hand it over to the experts and talk about some potential ideas that we may have. This may look familiar because it's the exact same concepts that we discussed during our meeting with the Soil Conservation District. Education is one possibility to consider. Enforcement is another, and then regulatory action either through DNREC or in conjunction with the county could be something that we consider. But before I get over my skis, I'm going to invite Mr. Baird to come forward and lead the conversation. Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning, members of County Council, and thank you to Mr. Lawson for teeing this conversation up. As you all are aware, this is not a new issue that any of us are experiencing. Previous councils have dealt with this issue to varying degrees. You obviously are ready to tackle the issue further, and I just think it's important to recognize that, yes, we've had some recent conversations just 2 weeks ago, but this is a conversation that took place last March with the previous council, and like I said, variations of that have also continued from previous years. But one of the things that you'll notice in the photographs that Mr. Lawson shared with everybody was that all of those were on active sites that were under construction. So that is the main focus of our attention right now. Not to say that there aren't discharges where there might be some problems with completed projects, but the primary focus that's causing the problems that are getting a lot of attention are coming from active construction sites. And as you can see, there has been a lot of activity done over the last couple of years on this, but really heavy an emphasis has been placed over the last year. And I'd really like to ask Jessica Watson to come up. Most of you already know Jessica. She has managed the Sediment and Stormwater program for SCD for a number of years and has a great reputation on that. So, Jessica, if you could come up and just highlight some of those items.
Yep, sure. Morning.
Hey there.
Morning. So as Dave said, we had the same conversation last year, and if you recall, last year was a ridiculously wet year, and we had a lot of construction issues just with back-to-back storms, and every rain event was a 3-inch rain event.
You know, you were getting tired of hearing from me for a while.
Yeah, it was exhausting. Last winter was exhausting. And so a couple things, as Dave said, when you have a construction site and you have a rain event, there's perimeter controls, there's sediment and erosion controls that are in place to try to filter, reduce sediment from leaving the site, kind of contain those fines that they do not wash into our waterways. I mean, that's utmost important to us. If you get a significant rain event, which we did have mid-March, it was roughly about 4 inches of rain in, I think, Hans, at our last meeting, you said you guys recorded in 2 hours. You had 4 inches in 2 hours. That is a significant rainfall event. And fact of the matter is, sediment and erosion controls are really only good for about a 1-inch rainfall event. They will become overwhelmed, and as you saw, there will be breaches. So in the one picture of Walden, we actually had super silt fence in that location. If you're familiar with that term, super silt fence is a chain link fence. So we had chain link fenced that is backing silt fence to try to anchor it in place. And even though we did have a lot of fill in those areas, if you get a 4-inch rainfall event on bare dirt, the water's it's gonna move. And so we did have a breach in that location, which was highlighted in the drone photos and has since been remediated. I think they even took pictures of the workers that were out there kind of manually having to remove dirt. And then the area was armored up again, and then we had to make some changes. So unfortunately, these rainfall events really highlight any weak areas that we have on a project. And here's the other thing I guess that people have to consider. Depending on the stage of construction, you have a plan and you're trying to maintain compliance, but every day there's certain critical aspects of that construction that's taking place. And then if you drop a significant rainfall event over that area, let's say if the pond is under construction or you have trenches that are open, things can go sideways. So for the West Ridge project, the pond is not complete. There is no outfall in that pond. It did not outfall to Hopkins Prong. So the pictures show, yes, you have a sediment trap that is holding water. The water in the pond looks bad. It's doing its job. The bad thing was, because we didn't have an outfall, that pond did come out of bank, and it did go into the neighbor's property. So that has since is being addressed. We do have an outfall structure in now, but then the gamble is when you have an outfall structure in, you can potentially have a discharge. And so sediment and erosion control practices, they only filter so much. You're going to have suspended fines that are in the water column that are very difficult to get out. So last year we learned a lot from the winter. And one of the tools in the toolbox that we don't take out very often is something called flocculant. It's where you use polymers. You're adding a chemical to the water to try to drop out suspended fines out of the water. That's really like you're at the end of the road. And it's expensive. It's an unknown technology. Did you have a question?
Well, I mean, tracking along with what you're saying, you said it's been remediated, but they didn't take the dirt out of the water. And that's there,
Right.
and that's settling on the bottom. That's killing whatever's on the bottom, and that's a long-term impact, and that's expensive too.
Right.
I mean, our Inland Bays generate billions of dollars in revenue, and everything we do, building out our sanitized sewer system, to take nitrogen out, and then we give it back by this sort of thing happening, and I expressed my frustrations a couple weeks ago to the applicant, and I'm probably going to express them again today. I apologize, but and we've talked about it too. Mm-hmm. But they say, well, it was a 200-year storm. Well, okay, maybe, but this silt fence is designed to accommodate an inch of water. Well, how often is that? We had 1.5 inches yesterday. Mm-hmm. So it's not like this really only happens every 200 years. So there's got to be different. Maybe no development in the spring if you're next to a body of water, because that's when we get the heavy rains. Maybe you have to do it different time of year. Maybe you don't disturb anything along. I don't know. I want to hear what you have to say and not talk a lot on this, but you understand how frustrated I am.
Oh, I mean, we feel the same frustration. I mean, protecting our natural waterways is very important to our office. Last year, we committed to, after we met with council, and, we were, instead of running around, last year we were running around trying to address all of these different construction issues while we were underwater, and trying to address that. Once we got past that, we said, hey, we regrouped. We're like, we have to do better. We have to figure this out. So we brought everybody together. The things that we learned last year, one, I was talking about the flocculant. That's kind of the end of the road treatment. It's a tool in the toolbox that it's not something that we've used regularly because it's unknown. You are then adding chemicals to the water, and you're using those chemicals to drop out suspended fines. And so we realized we don't know enough. We don't have suppliers around that could, provide us that information quickly.
But the fines settle on all the plants and everything else down there. Mm-hmm. It stays there, right? It covers them over. So now they're covered with silt that's settled out.
So what I'm talking about is another sediment and erosion control practice to try to prevent sediment from going.
Before it gets in the stream?
Yes, before it gets in the stream. So it's basically, it's called flocculation, and so last year, so the difficult part is you have a sediment trap that is full of sediment-laden water.
Right.
And that's its job. when you have a construction site, it goes through treatment trains. There's multiple practices before it gets to the pond. But the pond is the end of the road. Right. That water eventually is going to discharge through an outlet structure. But it's turbid. There's sediment-laden water in that pond because that's its job. The problem is you cannot get those suspended fines. You're dropping out the larger particles. I'm hoping this makes sense. The larger particles out of the water in the pond, but those microscopic fines, you could have it go through multiple geotextile fabrics to filter out. Those microscopic fines will still be in the water unless you add a flocculant or you have a very extensive treatment train or infiltration. There's multiple things at play. So I guess what I'm getting at is when you have a construction activity, you will, if there's an outfall, if there's some place for that water to go, you will have a discharge at different times, and there will be a level of turbidity. In the current Delaware Sediment and Stormwater regulations, the construction general permit, there is no affluent limitation in the federal permit with EPA for Delaware. And what that means is there isn't a turbidity threshold. So we don't have like a maximum extent. It's you use as best management practices to the maximum extent to try to clean that water up, but there's no maximum level of turbidity. So that's the current construction general permit, which is up for renewal in 2026. So that could very well change for Delaware. There's a good chance that that will. So for us in our office, we were trying to figure out, we were asking contractors to implement all of these different practices to clean up the water. We bought our own turbidity meter, the same ones that EPA uses, to try to help us figure out, are we doing are we cleaning this water up? Because you'll have different levels of turbidity in the water, but are we making a difference? So, so we use these meters to try to help us read what the levels were to see what was acceptable. Yes.
You're saying even after the water's discharged and it goes through this filtration process, whatever it is, even if it looks clear, there's still stuff in there that, what is it, blocking the sunlight to the plant, or still falls to the bottom, covers it, and kills it somehow? I mean, is it unknown?
No, so when you have a construction site, you're going to have, so the stormwater facility is functioning as a temporary sediment trap during construction. So there's devices on the outfall structure that kind of reduce flows leaving the site and to minimize the transport of sediment. But at the end of the day, the pond is still going to have a little bit of a turbid color because it's a construction site.
Okay.
Okay. So there's levels of turbidity. And so you can measure that with a meter. Like in Maryland, I think the standard is 150 NTUs. That's a turbidity threshold. We've been using their standard as kind of a guide for us and going out testing the water, going from upstream to downstream. Are we making a difference with adding all these different treatment trains? With the sediment and erosion control, because we don't want to get to the point where we're using chemicals in our ponds to drop out suspended solids. I'm hoping some of that makes sense.
I'll be perfectly honest. Where I am on this is, if you want to build on your property, that's fine. That's great. Keep your dirt out of the water. And I don't want to see any dirt. I don't want to see turbidity. I don't want to see clouding water.
Is Jessica, you were, no matter where you build, at least in eastern Sussex County, right, you're on water. You're on water.
Proximity, true.
Yeah.
And yet, it seems to me that the method of construction is first we tear down all the trees, therefore leave everything exposed.
Right.
Rains come, what's to hold it back? Right. Can you recommend, are there other practices for building that could be, that we could put into place, or we could, set up standards that would be more appropriate for an area such as the area we now are building in? Because it seems to me that the best practices that you've established thus far are still allowing a lot of sediment into our rivers and streams and flooding our neighbors. So can we just look at are there different ways of doing this?
And that's a good question, because besides doing kind of trainings with contractors and engineers last year on flocculation training, we brought in experts on all of that. We also met with all the different stakeholders. We met with engineers, developers, builders, everybody, and we got together and we had meetings and we said, look, we have to do a better job. We need to figure this out. And so one of the topics that was on the table was in the Delaware Sediment and Stormwater regulations, you cannot disturb more than 20 acres at a time. And so you have to stabilize the first 20 acres before you proceed into the next 20. So one of the discussion items was, do we go to 10 acres? You cannot open the 20. If you can't manage the 20 now, then maybe you have to go to a 10-acre increment. That was not received well, and we found out kind of legally under the sediment and stormwater regulations, we could not make people do that. So that was a discussion item. We've talked about, increasing stabilization, making sure that we're getting areas stabilized successfully before we proceed. So there were different things that we talked about to make better choices for some of these construction sites.
I don't know if that's something our attorney maybe could weigh in on this, but if that's something we could condition, as a
Yeah.
applicant,
Well, on that note, that application we looked at the last meeting, that's the first time I've heard of super silt fence. I've actually installed silt fence before a little bit. I didn't know they had that, so maybe that's a condition we can add. In that picture with the most egregious one, that I think it was on, maybe it was Sarah's Run, I'm not sure. Do you think a super silt fence might have mitigated that, in your opinion, or?
On the Walden project, there was super silt fence on that particular project. And when I was referring to remediation, I kind of meant that, they did go down and remove some of the sediment, but they also armored some other areas and redirected. They found a channelized flow, which blew out the super silt fence. They have fixed all of that, so the goal is not to have that problem occur again. Super silt fence does do a good job.
Okay.
Mr. Medlars.
Mr. President, council members, the last bullet here on the possible consideration, the county has Chapter 95, which is the county stormwater ordinance chapter. So you have the ability to just follow up on what Ms. Watson said. If, for example, you were to consider smaller areas of open bare ground, that's one thing you can have. Secondly, you could change the calculation of sediment traps because we could require it to be based on larger storms or on bare earth calculations. We could also require that they're cascading, that you have a series of the sediment traps across the site versus the single sediment traps. So I probably have 12 different items I can suggest to you in that world, which deal all with the sediment erosion control, which is the best practices piece of the stormwater regulation. That just deals with the journey between point A and point B, point A being the undeveloped ground and point B being the fully developed stabilized ground. So that's an erosion control world we can pick up very easily in Chapter 95 and come up with a number of recommendations. And we can also sort of reach back, and I think I talked to you and Councilman Lloyd in the parking lot about the buffer, concentration of the buffer in the area of greatest impact due to topography. In addition, we can look at, we learned a hard lesson at Inland Bays. When the same super vent blew out several times, and the living wall approach, which has not blown out in that same storm, is definitely an...
You're talking about the 4-inch storm we had
Yes,
recently.
in the same
I know we
4-inch
had a
storm,
problem down
which,
there.
Walden is about 3 miles away from our site.
Right.
So the first thing I looked at, how did Inland Bays look, especially in that channel after the storm? And we had 0 washouts. So I think there's definitely methods to just the sediment erosion control world we can pick up and then packages with some buffer changes, which are, that would be, in my opinion, much more preferable over the regulatory advisory committee, which will take years.
So would this be a county-wide, we would adopt this county, because to Councilmember Runenbaum's point, and David Baird said this too, you could be building on the west side of Millsboro and eventually that the microscopic fines are going to work their way down into the Indian River,
Yes, and there's a direct correlation between velocity and sediment. So, and the velocity is created by slope, topography. When you look at the county tax maps, which show the tax ditches and where they're concentrated, tax ditches exist in very flat terrain. So there's the velocities are much lower. That's why you don't see that problem as much on the west side of the county because of the topographic relief does not increase the velocities in the same storm event to that level of sediment transport. So in areas like Ms. Grunebaum's, being Walden, there was significant topographic relief, but the erosion and control measures were equal to if you had a flat site. And that's where their hands are bound. We can write into our site, a direct correlation between topography and measures. So you see, like, that's
So
where
each site would be specific.
each site would be specific.
Who would make that recommendation?
The former county engineer.
We're going to keep him on for a long time.
But I mean, like, I see where you're going, and if you want to work towards zero discharge, and let's just quickly look at for example, drinking water has a turbidity level of less than 10. So normally it's in the lower single digits. So that gives you perspective. But like, we could even look at, like, if you have a certain rainfall event which triggers, let's say, 150 parts, you must bring in, they actually make these filtration systems. They are transportable. I've seen them on tractor trailers. We used them before. That's when you pump it out and you treat it as needed, versus setting them up. So there's a number of ways. If you tell me you want it less than 20, we'll get you to less than 20. But it's just a matter of...
Well, a hypothetical attorney may argue that our current buffer zone is sufficient. And the counter to that would be, okay, if you've got a lot of confidence in that, would you be willing to accept a condition that says that maybe you're wrong, and if you're wrong, there's a penalty, So what would the penalty be? What would they have to do to...
I mean, if you were to look at...
I want to raise the bar, make the price high enough that they think twice, in other words.
I think the best way to look at the fine structure would be really sort of try to link it with the sediment. Let's say it's not measured in percent; it's measured in NTUs. So it's called National Turbidity Unit. So if you were to say at a certain turbidity unit level at 300, that's a serious violation. So you'd have your fines structured based on that. But the objective is, Councilman, to not have the discharge.
Right. That's what I want.
Just like when we had the buffer ordinance discussions, there was always the objective to have a working buffer system, and the fine side was really only, and I know at that point Councilman Hudson was really sort of saying, hey, we have to have both. We have to have a fine structure, and we have to have a buffer ordinance structure. And when you look at the sediment erosion control, you would want to think about it in the same manner. But
Can you go back a couple slides to where it was showing a breach, or where we were showing the turbidity leaving the job site?
This one, Mr. McCarron, or the other?
The next one.
One that would show the buffer. I guess that. So, if you go back to that, and that seemed, that's, no, the
other one, Todd.
Okay. Do we have an estimate on probably how many feet wide that buffer is?
50 feet.
50 feet. And if that was done today.
Looks like it's 5 feet.
But the key thing
it's
here
not
is,
much.
Councilman, have you ever been to this site?
No.
Sloan Road is every bit of 10 feet higher than that discharge point. That's a significant slope, which drove that.
So at the end of the project, are they just going to leave that soil there, or does it have to be moved back? Are they going to change the topography of their planned development, or are they going to have to remove the soil that was moved by the rain event?
The enforcement question falls.
Now, not for enforcement, to finish the development.
In the world of regrading, right? So all the sediment which sits outside of the buffer under our current rules and regulations of fine grading will have to come off. Now, what Jessica was referring to, whatever you see the discoloration in the stream, to Councilman Ryler's words, that's already settled out. You're not going to get that out. What's in the buffer can be probably removed by hand.
You
And they
can't
did
get
work
that,
on
Or machine at an expense.
you can't dredge that out. I mean, you really can't get that out?
If you dredged it out, you probably create more
More
turbidity
just-
than
yeah.
you So there's, you remember when the state does the dredging?
Graded, there is a financial loss, and I don't think they want it any more than them. The buffer will be twice as wide with the new buffer standards as what we're seeing in the picture,
It
correct?
wouldn't have stopped it.
No.
No, I would put $1,000 on that bet. But the fact is that that's where you want to look at the concentration of the buffers. When we see where the slopes go, it makes so much sense to go beyond the 100%. If we could take the averaging and triple it or quadruple it, 400 feet probably would have stopped it. But that's where the current ordinance hamstrings us to that 50% mark. We can't go beyond that. So that's why, that's the conversation we had in the parking lot. Yeah. But the key thing is, this here, on this side where we could clearly identify a weak point, we can have either, a living wall would have probably stopped the majority of it.
What's a living wall, meaning what? Meaning,
That's where you have, you built a series of logs, they're called core logs. You put plants, living plants behind it before you do this. So that is actually planted, it's stabilized during construction. Mm-hmm. So these are different tools which are currently not in the box.
And we could see those because they're at the Inland Bays facility right now.
2 years ago, I would have not been as much of a believer, but that storm taught me a good lesson.
Yeah, because we used to have a lot of water flowing across the road there, and we don't anymore.
I feel like we're either going to catch it, maybe, when it comes to public hearing for us, and we can try to mitigate with whatever conditions, or are you offering a standardized process by which to identify this using topography, proximity to wetlands, streams, tributaries, et cetera, so that every application gets captured through your office, or?
What we have the ability to, actually you, not we, you have the ability to take Chapter 95 and turn it into a tool for sediment erosion control. Because currently the tool in the toolbox, or the toolbox contains, like Ms. Watson said, best practices. And these best practices, they're listed, and they have to be applied. But the best practices fail in these instances because they're one size fits all.
Yeah, understood.
They're completely unrelated to the actual site you do.
And Chapter 95, is that what you use to apply to everyone that comes?
That's the county's chapter for stormwater.
Would that be cumbersome to take on as a standard, like reviewing applications in close proximity in that light?
So I'm going to put some words in David's mouth, but his team already reviews it. So if we have sediment erosion control measures which go above and beyond, it could be picked up on their side, it could be picked up. We review the detailed grading plans.
Okay.
So there's already there's a tie-in
Okay.
between our two staff teams.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hans. And that was exactly one of the points that I wanted to raise today before we wrapped up this discussion, was the fact that the district is currently in a position to incorporate whatever the county decides to do with this conversation and issue into our review process. Depending on what that outcome is, we'll determine what the next steps are, but we are certainly prepared.
I thought that topography comment, like if we see large disparities in topography in close proximity, I mean, that to me seems like the obvious indicator. If it's the velocity of the water over bare ground that determines how much sediment goes, that's the key, I think.
But it's also important to remember a point that's been raised here a couple of times today, is every site's going to be a little bit different. Mm-hmm. There's no site that's created equally. We've got fall, on these types of projects, and then you go in the central part of the county, it's as flat as a pancake, and you don't have those velocities. So wide variety of variables that are out there. I did want to touch upon, just as we start to close today, there were a couple, I think I'm going the right way here, recommendations that Mr. Lawson had on the screen. Am I going the wrong way? There we go. But as you can see, really when it gets down into the enforcement side and more so on the regulatory side, yeah, I really look at it as there's three things to consider going forward. The first being, we can obviously look at implementing to its fullest ability what's already in place between county ordinances, between the state sediment and stormwater regulations, between the permitting requirements that are out there. That's a place that we would want to start having that discussion. There's also the caveat in there that the county does have the ability to adopt some more stringent or different sets of regulations as it relates to sediment and stormwater. And that would be complementary to.
I phrase that as more effective.
Well, it's going to be up for interpretation, absolutely. But it's going to have to tie in with the state sediment and stormwater regulations. They can't run parallel with one another. They're going to have to dovetail
But we can be more
together.
stringent
Well, we can
than
be,
the state.
right.
Absolutely,
It's-
absolutely. And then the final one is, just, it was also touched upon by Mr. Medlars, is the fact that, we could certainly request that DENREC open up the sediment and stormwater regulations. That's a long, drawn-out process, regulatory requirements that are out there. We've had some conversations with folks from DENREC already. It's just a capacity issue within the department right now to be able to take something like that on. So there are challenges with no matter what route to take, but I think if we look at all of those, they're all three in play. But if the council was really serious on moving forward, and like I said, I think you are, just based on the fact that this is an ongoing conversation for years now.
Getting old.
What I would recommend that the council consider is, just allowing the district to work with both our partners at DENREC, to work with the county staff over the next, 2 months or so, to be able to bring back some more specific recommendations to you and really figure out how these things could tie together so that they would be not only effective in addressing the issue that you're trying to get to, but something that works for the people who are trying to do business here in the county as well.
I don't, we're not trying to put people out of business or anything, certainly, people have a right to develop their property, and I'm a firm believer in property rights, but your right to swing your arm ends at the end of my nose, right? So, keep your dirt on your own land.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the real issue behind the sediment and stormwater regulations as well.
Yeah.
And, as you know, Mr. Riley, sitting on the district board for a couple of years, these situations aren't tolerated at the district level.
Oh, I know.
either, nor at DENREC's.
I told you the story about driving to Dalhart, Texas to see the origins of the conservation district from the Dust Bowl years, and Washington, D.C. having topsoil settle on their desks in the Capitol. And, that's why the conservation district exists, is to, conserve the soil, and this is part of your mission. And,
It is.
so we're with you. I'm with you on that. It's important, and it preserves our waterways. We work so hard to, clean up the water, and then we just seem to take a step back, so.
And council is well represented, as you all know, with Mr. McCarron serving on our board now. So, there's a voice there that's directly impacting, what's happening at the district level as well. But I offer that to you, and however you'd like to proceed, we're here to help in any way. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I want to thank Dave and Jessica and Hans, and unless I hear otherwise, I think that would be the road forward, is come back
Yes, sir.
with some specific recommendations
Yes.
and understanding what council can do and the effort it would take, whether it's an ordinance or something else. We'll be back. Okay?
Can I ask Mr. Baird one question? If we did look at an enforcement mechanism, do you think there'd be any delineation, once you find a point and a source, is it going to matter what the source is, whether it's development activity or any other reason why the soil may be bare in the middle of March in Sussex County?
Because the farmland's
Good question. That's a good question.
Good question.
That's my concern, is this is a slippery slope and not to make a pun off of
You should talk about the.
topography, but
active agricultural uses, if that's the practice that's going on, is going to be exempt from many of the regulations. But,
The way I read it is only if they're in the conservation stewardship program, and I don't know what the percentage of farms that are
Well,
actively in that, but.
If they actively have a conservation plan is the approach that's taken. But if you look at most of the farms out there, most of them, number one, as we had talked about, are adopting cover crop during the winter months now. You know, we've got over 90,000 acres of cover crop that gets planted, significant increases in that. Plus, I just think there's a better awareness of the value of that soil, is that farmers are doing anything and everything they can to keep that soil on their fields because they know that's their lifeline.
Well, that was my point in having to move it back when you're making a development. It's not like they carelessly allow this to happen.
Sure.
I just want to make sure what works on the east side of the county also works on the west side of the county. We don't open up a can of worms, because
Good question.
I certainly don't want to see this impact in a Rehoboth Bay, but I did spend a lot. After a rain event, cucumbers were planted in a tilled field.
Sure.
And you'd go out to see what areas washed out sometimes. And like you said, that is not something anybody looks forward to, but I just want to make sure that we're not moving in the wrong direction.
And I'm certainly not going to stand here and say that, you know, erosion is not taking place coming off of some of the fields. It certainly is. But I can tell you in the agricultural settings, at least where most of the ditching, and especially the tax ditches are involved, we're going to have more erosion from what gets sloughed off on the banks each year than what we're going to see coming off the fields. So,
Good question.
Well, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Lawson,
Yes, sir.
number 2, consideration and approval of the MOU with
Projects, they actually have to do a very careful analysis of how much turbidity they create.
Yeah.
The point I was trying to make is this: it's not zero impact to the person who had their soil moved. They certainly will have to regrade everything. I don't think they casually looked at this and said, well, we spilled lost a lot of soil into to the stream there. There certainly is a financial impact to the person who is actively working that ground up in the form of having to regrade it. There is a financial loss, and I don't think